Amazing, amazing. Y'all a bunch of nerds coming out on a weekday for a conversation with the Inspector General. I love that. I'm just thrilled to be in this room with y'all. For those of you who I don't have the pleasure of knowing, my name is Rohit Malhotra. I'm one of the team members here at the Center for Civic Innovation. If y'all could join me, I love starting these mornings with just like showing love and gratitude to our staff that has been here very early and stayed very late to make this happen. Thank you, thank you. This is also our last week for our interns, which is very exciting. So, we love the kids, and they are some of them are not children, some of them are older than some of our staff. So, but like in all seriousness, there are folks who have come in from all over the country to be a part of the work that we're doing here, and we're just so grateful. And that's especially true this year. This year is our 10th year of doing this work, and I keep saying it out loud because anybody who is a part of an organization that has grown over time, you know that you don't celebrate the milestones when you should, and then you're mad that you didn't. And then number two, that it's just really hard to make it 10 years doing this type of work, which is to do it from a place of honesty, of true love and unapologetic love for Atlanta. We always say that a lot of times people see us as poking at Atlanta, or they ask like, oh, do you guys not like Atlanta? We were like, actually, we love Atlanta. And that's exactly why we do this work in the way that we do it. And when we started this organization 10 years ago, the first event that we ever did was a leadership breakfast. And we said, why don't we get folks who we genuinely want to have a conversation with, want to be able to ask them questions like, how'd that happen and why'd that happen? And also like, who are you? Like, where did you come from? And like, what is the work, and to humanize people who are doing this work in our city. We started this, and some of the tables looked similar. These were definitely the same chairs that we took from somewhere else that we found, but they've been cleaned, don't worry. They're but in all seriousness, like it was always important to us to just get around a room and have a conversation. That's what today is about. We are very, very fortunate and lucky to have the Inspector General with us. Anyone who has been around me in the last month, I feel like a conspiracy theorist, like someone who was just like, or someone who like discovered something that no one else has discovered. Like when you think you were the first person to discover pickleball, you're like, yeah, I still don't know what that is, but I know that there are people very enthusiastic about it. I feel the same way about the Inspector General's office, which is an office that you think everybody knows about, and everybody's definitely heard maybe rumblings about it, but what is it, and who is this person that occupies that office? We have a packed room tonight or today, but if on the count of three, you could just say your name, and Shannon will absorb all of that information. That will be how we do introductions. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Got it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And how many of you how many of you were born in Atlanta? All right, we got some natives in the room. Okay, great, great. And how many of you have been here for more than 15 years? Okay, a lot of folks in the room. Great. And how many of you are new to Atlanta? You've been here for like less than a year. Okay, hi, welcome. Welcome to Atlanta. It's great. Yeah, so we're no matter what your relationship to Atlanta is, we hope that this is a conversation that is relevant to you. We will have I'll do an interview with Shannon for just a little bit, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. If you have a burning question, like something comes up and you feel like you just got to say something, this is a family space. So say what you got to say and do what you got to say. I'm trained at this, so I got that. And then and also when you have a question, just make sure it ends with a question mark, and we're all good. And I think we'll be good. Y'all ready to rock? Cool. Are you good?
Yeah.
All right, sweet. We have a bunch of folks who are tuning in as well. Thank you to Chris and his team that have been doing videography, and for us to make sure people at home can see this too. Look at that transparency in action. I love it. Well, Shannon, I'm very excited to have this conversation. There's so many things that I know that is on people's minds about your current role and like what's going on, and we'll get there. But if you could humor me for a little bit, that not only did people not know that this office necessarily existed, they were like, who is Shannon? And where did she come from, right? So I actually want to get to know who is Shannon for a second. And I love asking the first question, which is, why where does public service come from for you as a person?
Well, first, good morning, everybody. Shannon is a thankful person. And so first I want to thank the members of the leadership team from the Office of the Inspector General who are all here. One of our board members for the governing board of the Office of the Inspector General is here. So thank you. And thank you all, of course, for being here. And thank you, Rohit, for having me.
Of course.
Public service for me comes from my family. So both of my parents worked for the government for their entire careers. My aunts are teachers. One of my aunts was the superintendent of schools in Newark, New Jersey. The other aunt, who's a teacher, kind of regularly talked about all of the things that she did that I would describe as being servicey outside of her teacher service, right? She's a students who had need, and so she'd bring in, okay, here are hotel soaps and shampoos and things because we want to make sure this student's taken care of. That looking out for other people is something that has been kind of a hallmark of the work of my family.
Where'd you grow up?
New Jersey, Jersey girl.
Okay.
Yes.
Whereabouts in New Jersey?
So Scotch Plains, New Jersey, which is
Okay.
like north central, nobody ever heard of, about 40 minutes outside of New York City.
Okay. And do you have siblings?
I do. I grew up with
Okay.
my sister, who's a few years older than me.
Okay.
The greatest.
Greatest?
She's the absolute greatest.
Okay, so you have just an older sister?
Yeah.
Okay. And what makes her the greatest? Does she think you're the greatest? Yeah? Okay. Okay.
That's true. No, I mean, she's, gosh, you want to talk about looking out for people. She's a doctor and attributes a lot of times her profession to looking out for me. Okay. Right? That she's 6.5 years older than me, and so was often given kind of babysitting roles earlier than would be acceptable nowadays.
Yeah.
All right. She'll talk about how when she was 10, walking me from nursery school when I was 3 and having that responsibility.
Yeah.
And that kind of caretaking is something that she says she's a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist, but the looking out for me, her baby sister, was one of the things that she says, well, this is part of why I'm a doctor. I've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
So yes. And so now she's Dr. Mommy. I have 3 wonderful nieces. She does it all. She's the absolute greatest.
What kind of doctor is she?
So she's a pediatrician, but she did a specialty in adolescent medicine. So she likes to describe it as, doing the sex, drugs, and rock and roll for that kind of teenage. And she's ready to talk about all of that, right? Like, gosh, because there is the gap that we have between us, she was so excited when I got to like middle school. She's like, you don't have to talk to mommy about any sex issues. You can talk to me. So what questions do you have? And I'm like, I don't have any questions. And she was always disappointed.
Yeah.
But yes, she was that person who in college, was in the, the organization that gave out condoms all the time.
Yeah.
She was in med school. She was in the students teaching AIDS to students and going around to other schools. Like that's kind of core what she is. But yeah.
I love that. What's her name?
Simone
and Shannon. Nice. Who raised? What would you say raised you? Aside from your sister. Yeah.
My parents.
Yeah.
Both of them in kind of different styles, but very much kind of strong. We ate dinner together every night. There was a checking of homework, the kind of, I grew up in a town where my sister had grown up when we lived in East Orange. We moved when I was 3. East Orange, all black, Scotch Plains, mostly white. And so when we moved to my town, I think there was always the thought of, well, let's make sure that there's no issue here. You know who you are, smarts, right? So at the point where 2nd grade, I wasn't put in the most competitive math class. It was like math group was like, oh, no, this isn't going to work. So my father gave me math problems to do instead, right? Like whatever they're doing, nope, here's the long multiplication. You're going to do this instead. And that was what it was. And in third grade, when I wasn't put in gifted and talented, it was like, nope, that's not going to work out. And so there was always this kind of advocacy, my father more vocally, but my mother equally fiercely, just more quietly.
Yeah.
But yes, raised by both of them.
You said they both worked in government. Yeah.
Mhm.
What were they doing in government?
So they were both economists, and so originally out of law school, they each went to work for the Department of Labor. And so my mom spent her entire career there. Every time you read about the Consumer Price Index, the Producer Price Index, there are economists who were gathering all of that information, and so she was part of that. My father started that way, but then went to law school. I actually remember him when he was in law school. I was really, really young, but I remember all the highlighting, right? Like I just remember books and highlighters. So that was my early notion about what law school was. I never used highlighters, maybe for that reason. But once he got his law degree, he then started working for other still government entities. So he was with the Board of Education for Newark for a number of years, and then with the Newark Housing Authority.
Do you how would Simone describe Shannon in high school?
Nerd, obviously.
Yeah.
Goes without saying, right?
I don't like highlighters. Yeah, I got it.
Busy. I think we've been described as busy. So, it's like you have to drop all those things once you get to college, but when you're in high school, if you're someone who's really active, you do everything, right? So in high school, I ran track for some time. I was captain of the bowling team. I was on the town's kind of public access channel on the news. So I was the art and entertainment anchor. I was the president of the debate club. I choreographed for the rep theater and for show choir. I played the flute. Like you do everything. You do a little bit of everything. So
that's not normal, by the way. That's not like
I'll do that.
of course, like weren't you the neighborhood anchor for news and entertainment and dance? Yeah, of course. Yeah,
I need to find those on YouTube now. I think those would be classic. I mean, but very, the faux news anchor.
Yeah,
Shannon Manigault sitting at the desk, and he kind of got a little spruced up for the day. It was fun.
do you remember anything you reported on that like sticks out to you?
No, it wasn't like investigative journalism.
Yeah.
I'm not deep probing. No, I was
Yeah.
arts and entertainment anchor. So it was a lot of covering of, here was the school play and this is the star and let's have an interview. And
I thought it was like trash television, like being like, do you know Kim Kardashian?
No, this was pre that.
Got it.
That's probably what it looks like now.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that's funny. So you were just very, very involved. What you talked about moving from what was dominantly Black neighborhood to not. How aware were you of your identity throughout all of this? And what role did your identity play in maybe you feeling like you had to do all of those things, or did that not play a factor?
I don't know that played a factor in the activities, but it certainly played a factor in every other aspect of my life, right? I mean, it's a real tension because, my parents grew up in Newark. They went to Howard, right? I grew up with Malcolm X speeches on vinyl, right? Like
Nice.
Black, right? No question, right? But then in this environment that was so white, where for both of my parents, I think there was some nervousness about, we're putting her into this space where in my town, there were still pockets, Black pockets, and we lived in one of the 3 Black pockets in town. But when I went to class, once it got to a certain grade level, I was the only person in class, right? I was the only Black person in class. And so I think for them, it was she's still gonna, I'm bringing home friends and white friends and they're scared, right? I was like, no, I'm still who I am, right? And that the real, I think, test for them, and it wasn't for me, was when in high school, the first kind of overtly racist thing happened to me in high school, and it was from a teacher. And I was pissed, immediately called it out to my friends, my non-Black friends who were in the room at the time because I was the only Black face in the room. And they got it immediately. And when I got home and told my parents about it, they were relieved that I'd perceived the overt racism, right? Like this is a teacher who was coming in, taking over for a teacher who'd actually died. And so was doing a little get to know you in the class and asking everyone, oh, well, where are you applying for school? And everybody, this is AP calculus. So everyone's saying the same kinds of snooty schools, you know, 10 students before me, but when it comes to me, and I say the same kinds of schools, she says, oh, so you got good grades and other stuff, right? Nobody had gotten a question like that. I'm in AP calculus. Are you kidding me? Right? Like, I was like, yeah, I'm good on that, right? But that I acted on it, that I told people, I think, principal in school, that there were these steps. I think they were relieved at that. They were also relieved that my friends were with me, that they understood what it was and were pissed for me, because I think that my sister had not necessarily had that experience of kind of supportive friends. And so I think there was always this skepticism that my parents had that, so I was good, right? I had a solid sense of who I was identity-wise, but nothing about that precluded me from being friends with all of my classmates, regardless of color.
This is I mean, we are, there's this finally like people are beginning to recognize that, and maybe not fully, but in Atlanta, like you can't treat Black folks as a monolith, right? Like there's no one way a Black person shows up into a room. But what we're also seeing is finally like a rise in leadership of the nerdy Black girl, right? Like in a lot of ways, right? And there's this discussion around always having to qualify that you're nerdy, but like what what is that? What where does that come from? For you, how do you talk to young like folks who are also like challenged in their own identity, right? Who may be in spaces where they're the only person. What do you think about your identity like what were you able to ground yourself in for folks who that's not as comfortable for, that's not as easy to navigate?
I think a healthy self-confidence, right? I mean, because that will help you combat so much of the outward nonsense. And both of my parents, I think, instilled that in myself and in my sister. And so that goes a long way, right? There were also people who very much were excellence driven. And so, I was telling my office the other day, I was like, yeah, there was definitely a phenomenon of, you get a 95 on a test, and it's where were the other 5 points? Thanks. Right? No pressure. But it's okay to want to strive for excellence, to have that as your standard, to be unabashed about the kind of nerdiness and finding things interesting that might not be interesting to other people and delving into that, right? My sister studied French in high school and won the French award, and I studied French in high school and won the French award, and so did my mom, actually, the same things. And she texted me, on Sunday, she said, I finally watched all the opening ceremonies. I'm geeking out about all this Paris stuff. And I was like, yes, I know, right? Like, like me too, right? Like that, the kind of pleasure in okay, all of these things that were reference points that we'd studied for years and all of that, like that's okay. The confidence and the lack of self-doubt, and I think it was probably easier before it was the age of social media, where now there's everything kind of cutting into people, but.
Well, it's not always the archetype that we uplift, right? There's also, we're starting to see more of it now, but that's not always what news entertainment reporters on channel, whatever channel you were on, are always lifting up, right? So who did you look up to? I mean, you obviously had it at home, right? You had you had parents there. For you, who was it that you were like, this is someone I look up to. This is someone that I strive to be. Or is there someone today that does that well for you?
One of the questions from your wonderful team, shout out to Evan, sent is about things and people that shaped my thinking. And one of the things I sent to him was my high school history teacher, who was wonderful, Joel Glazer. And he had these projects where you had to do something that was creative. He was trying to make sure he tapped into the talents and capabilities of everyone, because people learn differently. And I did a project that was a minute of the 50s. And my project was on Brown versus Board of Education. And like I said, for this particular class, there was another Black woman in the class. And then she graduated earlier, so my senior year was just me.
Yeah.
But for the project, for the creatively, I had us, both of us, she didn't know I was going to do this, but we dragged our chairs out into the hallway. And I gave my presentation from the hallway. And I said, imagine what this class would be like without the two of us in it. So both of us were very vocal, we're very, you know. And so just all in a minute to kind of talk about the impact of the case. But it had an impact on me too. I mean, a creative project, got an A.
Yeah.
But the thinking about the Supreme Court and the way that it impacted people's day-to-day lives, like what would it be if I couldn't have been in this town, in this school, in this class, where, you know, I got so much and also had a presence, and, you know, what would it be for my classmates to have not had that opportunity to interact with me in that way? And so I started thinking about the Supreme Court and the way that it really just impacted lives. You know, it was not just kind of lofty legal theory, that the decisions really did just affect people's day to day, and mine included. So I started thinking about the Supreme Court in that way. And so Thurgood Marshall, and even, you know, not just the Supreme Court and all of the civil rights cases that made their way there, but you know, some of the lower courts and Constance Baker Motley, and my thought of, gosh, yes, this is really the space that I want to be in.
Yeah. So you knew in that moment where you like, I want to be a lawyer one day. Is that?
I mean, that was the lawyer thing was probably a little earlier than that, because I think, you know, people tend to lack creativity. And so if you have a smart kid, it's, oh, you're gonna be a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah.
And then annoyingly, my sisters and I ended up being, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that, you know, if you're at all argumentative, and I tended to be, then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
right? And so, you know, hate to kind of fit in that stereotype. But with that project, I mean, it wasn't just wanting to be a lawyer. I was like, I want to be the Supreme Court. Right?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that same high school
They may have some
teacher-
openings soon, but
No,
it's
so
interesting.
this is that same high school teacher, you know, from that project, and I followed my path, and he really was my favorite. With this last vacancy with Justice Jackson, he reached out to me. I hadn't been in touch with him with years and years and years and years, but he found me through the city of Atlanta. He and his son had done, you know, Google to find me. And he said, you know, I was writing this editorial to the New York Times because, of course, at that point, Biden had signaled that he wanted the justice to be a Black woman. And so they were talking about all the shortlist people. And he said, I'm writing this editorial saying they missed one and that it should be you. And so we're on the phone. I'm on speaker. I'm driving. It's the end of the day. I should have pulled over. I'm bawling, right? I'm so emotional. This is so incredible. And also it's like, well, come on now, right?
Yeah.
And then I told my parents about it. They're like, come on now. Thank you for that vote of confidence. But
what a big deal that is, right? To like, I mean, it's yet another representation, I think, of
yes.
like the multiple manifestations of genius that can exist.
It's
in Blackness.
Yeah, it's you know, whatever. I don't know. We have so much kind of local politics. I don't want to talk about global politics, but right, yet again, we're getting to see the impact of the court and the current configuration of the court and what it means and the impact this is going to have in Americans' lives now for the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy. And yeah, it's going to take a long time to kind of undo some of the things that are in the works. But anyway.
Did you end up following your parents' footsteps to Howard? Was that?
No.
Okay.
So they were funny about it. My parents have kind of different postures, right? My dad was like, you get in wherever you can get in and we got it. Yeah. My mom was like, a free college education would be really lovely, right? We're in New Jersey, you know, Rutgers, between the various local scholarships and things, you know, I might have made money on it. So my mom was like, are you, you know? But no, I ended up going to Harvard.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, you don't have to whisper it. It's a great. And we expected that this was all a lead up to, by the way, we've all seen your bio. It's
it's funny. I considered it because Howard sent a nice package of material, it's like, oh, if you're contemplating it, let's see. And I had done this program going into my senior year of high school, Governor's School for Public Issues in the Future of New Jersey, catchy name. But shout out to Governor's School for anyone who's familiar with the program. It's amazing. Only a handful of states have them. One of my closest friends from that summer program, kind of, similarly situated academically, knew she was going to Yale, right? Applied early, knew it, she was in love with Yale, yeah. And then she got that packet after she'd gotten in early, and it was from Howard, and she was like, what? And I was like, really? You were so gung-ho? And she's like, yeah. So she ended up dropping Yale, going to Howard. She, because she is who she is, ended up being one of the first Rhodes Scholars in decades there. Howard went to town on the advertising for that, right? So my parents, both alumni, they get a postcard in the mail showed up with my girl's picture, and they knew her. They're like, yeah. Yeah. My mom had that postcard up at her desk until she retired. People in her office thought that was me. They're like, I don't know. It's great because she's so proud of Carla. Yeah, she should be proud of Carla. Shout to Carla Peterman, right? Rhodes Scholar, and I visited her when she was in Oxford because take advantage of that kind of thing. But no, I didn't end up following their footsteps. I went to Harvard and loved every moment of it.
And so Harvard is not known to be a place where there aren't a lot of Black people, right? There, right? So that's a joke. There are not a lot of Black people at Harvard. So there's like a very much so like you have to find these pockets, right? Of what exists there. I mean, just in pure numbers, there's just not a lot of folks there.
I guess not raw numbers necessarily, but there's a reason why that Supreme Court case with affirmative action came from Harvard. Harvard has historically really valued diversity. And so my class had, there were maybe 11% Black, which doesn't sound like a lot, but is a lot. And that meant that there was kind of good critical mass, a class of 1,600. That meant there was north of 160 of us. And my class the Black students in my class were particularly cohesive. I mean, we were tight as a group. And that was just, not to age myself, but the dawn of email. So we had an email list from our freshman year where it was us, the Black students on this email list, and it's called the 99 list. The year I graduated, old. But we still have the 99 list, right? It's morphed over time. We've used that. I think it's now on Signal. Right? Is that okay. Nice, yeah. Right? But like that group, that bond for all of us, I never felt like the only in the way that I did in high school.
Because you were surrounded.
Yes, a nice. Yeah. It was great. I mean, these are still, some of my very closest friends. These were my classmates and friends from the 99 list.
Yeah. So did you after college, or were you like, okay, law school definitely next, or did you take a break, or what happened after that?
Yeah, it was law school definitely next. And what was funny was that was a moment in time where, I guess it was like a up with wellness kind of in the student advising space. So I was pretty sure that I wanted to go to law school, and you had all of these people in the kind of house system that were saying, well, take some time, take a year, even if you get in, you can defer. And my idea about deferring was like, well, listen, these are for people who always wanted to do something else, right? Who had to be in their bonnet about, I was not very kind the way I thought about it. These were wonderful things that other people wanted to do. But I was like, oh, these are people who wanted to write a book, sing a song, row a boat, climb a mountain.
All the things you did in high school. You're like, I did that. Yeah.
It's like I didn't want to sing a song or row a boat or climb a mountain. I wanted to go to law school. Yeah. So I went straight. Okay. And no regrets about that either.
Where'd you go to law school?
I stayed at Harvard for law school.
Okay. So you just stayed, didn't have to travel far.
No.
Okay. No. For being in law school at Harvard, who shaped your thinking while you were there? Was it still, who was your equivalent of this history teacher at Harvard? Obviously, the place is packed with folks who have a long-standing history of thought. So,
yeah.
who shaped yours?
Gosh, a combination of folks. 1L year, I had then Professor Elizabeth Warren, now clearly Senator Elizabeth Warren. And there's always that professor that, you know, kind of that strikes fear in the heart. When I got my kind of slated professors, the 2Ls and 3Ls were like, oh, you're in the Warren class. It was like, oh my gosh. So first class, I get called on the first class, not the first person, thank goodness, because that person got a really hard time. But it, you know, she was a tough, Socratic, no nonsense kind of professor, enough so that I did okay with answering the question that first time. But there was one class where there was some ambiguity the day before about what cases were going to be covered the next day. And I guess she'd send an email late and I'd missed it. So I got to class the next day and there was one case that I hadn't read out of like 5. And I sat there and was like, 150-person class, the odds I get called on, the odds I get called on this particular case, like, it's not going to happen. He was like, I can't risk it. I picked up my stuff and I left. And there was a girl in my class, she was like, don't let her methods intimidate you out of your education. I was like, no, I'm good on that, right? Like, I come to class, I come prepared, I'm ready. I'm not even gonna take the chance, I'm risk averse, I'm not gonna roll the dice that I'm not gonna be prepared for this question. So I left. It was like the one class I missed all semester, but she was great. And I think some of the things that we're seeing in terms of her views about consumer protection and the role that she started playing now, I think was evident then. I had Lawrence Tribe, the storied constitutional law professor who, you know, could have, should have, maybe would have been on the Supreme Court, and I thought it was wonderful. But I also did a criminal clinical during my 3rd year, and that was probably the course that I enjoyed most. And while he didn't do a lot of instruction, because it was largely through the kind of panel of adjunct professors, but Charles Ogletree ran that criminal clinical, and there's nobody greater. And I'm so thankful to have had the opportunity to learn under him.
I was in mock trial, just so you know. I also like don't want to downplay how like dope it is that you go from a small place in New Jersey, you know, push through the way you did with your focus. You go to Harvard undergrad, you go to Harvard Law School. That is not something I think we have to brush over. I think it is
like Felicia. For anyone who hasn't met the director of information and outreach, almost everything we put, she's like, so I'm going to put your bio. I said, Felicia, don't put that. No. She's like, that's important. I said, no, it really isn't, right? It's about this work. It's about the office. Like, please don't do that,
well,
right?
I think it's because the humility of folks like you in these circumstances, definitely when you erase that, then people don't see it because they're not automatically assuming it because of already existing assumptions or bias, right? And so I think that affirming it, that is not even you just affirming like, look, it's not an anomaly. There were a bunch of brilliant Black folks around me at Harvard. Like that to me is something I think worth normalizing, and just like kind of. I think that is okay, great. I think it's worth normalizing because I think there are a lot of talented young folks who will see inspiration in that, and whatever it is that they may want to do.
No, you're right in some ways, right? Because the image that's out there, I think it's something that's off-putting, right? The Legally Blondes and the all the other kind of representations.
No one's confusing you with Legally Blonde. I just
certainly
that is not
the
reference that people.
No, but I'm saying that people look at that and it's like, if you're a Black kid, you want to, if you're a Black college student, right? So you're even more exposed, more grounded. You see something like Legally Blonde, you think that's where you want to go? Like, no, because the assumptions about it being exclusive or being for a certain kind of person, even she was tapping into other kind of stereotypes that were less race-based, but you know, it's like, no, there is something to fully demystifying, right? For kind of talented students from wherever, however, no, this is a path and you've got every option open to you. The Howards and the Harvards do it, right? Like any opportunity you can. Because there are talented people going to be wherever you go, and just know that this is a good door that you can go through.
Folks got to see Legally Black too.
That's
That's good.
right.
Yeah, it's important. So what for you now, you know, your career, there's a multitude of things we could go over, but I want to jump to you in the in New York City as the inspector general there. Did you know what an inspector general was before you got there? Because it's not a common thing that people always talk about is like, oh, this is a inspector general inside of a city. You don't like, it's not necessarily something you vote for. It's usually somebody that's appointed, but what brought you to the office of inspector general in New York City?
Yeah, so I'd lived in New York before I got to the Department of Investigation, which is the kind of IG's office for New York City. And I was at a law firm for a number of years as a litigator. And without question, they like the litigation associates at my firm, shout out to Davis Polk, to be generalists, right? So they didn't want you to just focus on, you know, antitrust or on securities or on this or on that. But I kind of lucked out in getting an assignment early on in my time that was an internal investigation in white collar matter. And it dominated my time for a while. And so because I was on this great case where, you know, it was a matter that started off with 4 people, and within 3 weeks, it was the biggest litigation matter we had. There was something like 30 lawyers on it. And that's fast moving. But because I was one of the original 4, it was like I had all this institutional knowledge from 3 weeks, so that I got to do things that were way above what would have been my level as a second year. And so got to do fun things with a team that was so incredible. And then that meant that they brought me on to other cases that were the same, other good internal investigations. I really love the investigations work. The pace of it, as opposed to a securities litigation that's going to last 10, 11 years, the having to master the facts. You know, you really have to know what you are doing quickly, because you're going to be reviewing documents, you're going to be interviewing people, so you need to know what you're talking about, because then you're going to be questioning people. And so that, right, nerd, so having to learn all the things and get up to speed, I thought that was so great. But I also, being at the firm, knew I wasn't going to be at the firm long, right? I wanted to be at the firm long enough to be well-trained as a lawyer, as a litigator, to help make a serious dent in my law school loans, because hello. But I didn't want that to be permanent. I knew I wanted to do public interest. Yeah. At that point, I started working, kind of bizarrely happenstance, at New York City Council. And the way that it came about was current Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg had been someone who our paths had crossed before. I interned for the judge that he clerked for. And I was the only intern that summer. Shout out to Judge Patterson. And because of that, had a good interaction. He had been the chief of litigation at New York City Council. He was leaving his position to be a prosecutor. You should come and take my position. I'm like, okay, well, sure, I know litigation. Yeah. And then I applied and I didn't get it. It's like, well, that's too bad. But the woman who was general counsel was like, gosh, I'd really love if you stayed here. I was like, okay. And so she introduced me to the legislative director, and then I got an offer within a couple of weeks. But chief of litigation was something I understood as a litigator. Suddenly I'm legislative counsel. It's like, what is that going to be? I'm writing laws for the city oversight? I don't know.
Yeah.
But once I got into that, the staff from New York City Council, by virtue of kind of the space that you occupy, you learn everything about the city. So I learned everything about the city. And I was counsel to 2 committees, 1 contract, so I learned everything about procurement. And so I was writing contracts laws and procurement-related laws for New York City. But the other committee of mine was the Committee on Oversight and Investigations. And it had, as part of its purview, the Department of Investigation. And I'd lived in the city a number of years, but to your point, didn't know about the Department of Investigation, DOI, until I was in that space at City Council. And the more I learned about it, the more it seemed like, well, gosh, what an opportunity this might be, because it brought together all of the skills and experience that I developed at the law firm in terms of investigations within everything that I knew about how New York City functioned.
Yeah.
And it just felt like the perfect marriage. And where I figured my career was going to kind of go a different direction, this really was like, well, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I applied for an inspector general position at DOI. And so I wasn't the inspector general for the Department of Investigation. They're set up kind of like the federal system where they're IGs for city agencies. So I was one of 12 or 13 inspectors general.
Okay.
So I was the inspector general for the fire department, the Department of Sanitation, the Taxi and Limousine Commission, the city's Office of Emergency Management, and its Conflicts of Interest Board.
So there's multiple inspectors
Yes,
that are overseeing certain departments.
that's right.
And then those, how is that structured? Is that, who do the inspectors general,
So I had a team, a
report to?
squad, right? So it was set up in a squad system. So I had a squad of investigators that focused on those 5 agencies in
Yeah.
our portfolio.
And who did you report, who did all the inspectors general vote?
Kind of a bureaucracy. So, you reported to, at one point, it was an associate commissioner and then a deputy commissioner and then the commissioner.
Okay.
And so.
And what commissioner of what?
Commissioner of the Department of Investigation. So she was then the department head for this agency, just
Yeah.
like the, commissioner of the fire department.
And so how many degrees away was this from the mayor's office?
So DOI is set up in, there are different ways that offices of inspector general are structured. DOI occupied a space where it theoretically dually reports to mayor and city council. Okay. And the idea is that dual report will, kind of hinder any nonsense, right? So that if you're responsible for the mayor, then the city council is supposed to be the check to make sure that you're not kind of in cahoots with the mayor. And responding to the city council, the mayor then has the same function in terms of the work that you would do with city council.
Hypothetically speaking, if the mayor and the city council seem to be in cahoots, just hypothetically, if that were the case, then what is the alternative? I mean, because if both parties have decided what they want to see, right, or have a backroom agreement, like the New York way or something, if that was true, like how would you navigate that, or what does that do to the effectiveness of your office?
Right. So using this hypothetical in New York,
yes,
right, it wouldn't happen so much because everyone knows about DOI, right? Like there would be so many checks on such a thing because the public knows, right? Every time there's a report, there's coverage, everybody knows, so that even with this kind of structure, no one's going to kind of be a bad actor and move against the office, because it's just not how it works, right? Yeah. One of the other things I sent to Evan in terms of shaping is Boss Tweed, right? So for the nerds in the room, this was, Tammany Hall, late 1800s, forefather of municipal corruption, right? Who, if you're at all inclined, look at the Wikipedia. It is so very interesting, all of the exploits and how much he personally benefited from his graft. But that the predecessor in name for the Department of Investigation came from that scandal. We didn't find it, right? It was in the aftermath where he got away with a whole bunch after he'd gone to jail. Then they're like, we probably need an office to look at these kinds of things. So that was 1873. Last year, DOI celebrated 150 years, right? People aren't getting away with the kind of thing that you were describing in New York, because this is just, even though I just said people didn't know about it, people who know civically engaged people do really know about it.
So this office came out of corruption that happened under Boss Reed.
Boss Tweed, yes. It was, I mean, like I said, I for some of the presentations and stuff we make, I have all the stats and things in my mind, but like, when people talk about the $200 hammer, it was that like exponentially, right? They talk about the project where a painter you know, was supposed to be painting for a city project, and it was like a 3-day project, and made like $200,000 in 1870s dollars, right? Like, because this was a pal of the circle, that all of the things that, you know, are still it's timeless and universal. Some of this
What's
corruption, the you get a job because of who you know, you
Right,
get a
right.
contract because of who you know, you then give a kickback into the system, right? These aren't new concepts.
Right, they've been
They're,
happening.
that's right.
What's when you were in New York, what was the biggest thing you uncovered? I read through some of the reports that you published, that the office had published, that, findings, whether it's around
Yeah.
taxi related stuff or whether it is around
Yeah.
sanitation workers. Well, for you, like what's the marquee thing that you were like, this took time, we figured it out, and we made government better because of that investigation?
I think a couple of things, and unfortunately, fortunately, there were a couple that didn't actually make their way to the public reports that we anticipated they were going
Yes,
to,
I'm gonna
right?
get to that. For sure.
Yeah,
Yes,
because
yeah.
there's the what gets into a public report, and a lot of times, you want to have a report that goes out in tandem with an arrest that's being made. But in terms of impact, there were, I mean, it's so specific, but or the IG for the fire department, there were fire inspection issues where you had people who were supposed to be cleaning ducts, so like the grease ducts, fire trap things in restaurants. And it's supposed to be done, quarterly. And there was a racket where you had businesses that were just like, well, if you give me this amount of money, I'll slap a sticker saying that you've been inspected, but you hadn't actually been inspected. And that this was widespread. And you can imagine the hazard that presents, right? So let's set aside the graft part of that, but all of these institutions with all of this grease buildup, and then of course, what happens? Fire, an actual fire at a place where it was clear that this had gone on. And so we were part of working hand in hand with the fire department, identifying these bad actors, right? So these were kind of licensed inspectors who were engaging in this conduct, and in some cases entirely unlicensed, right? Just purporting to have been licensed. We work with the fire department to address that issue. And that's the way it's supposed to work, right? That you have a city department that recognizes we have a problem and working hand in hand to address that problem. And so they got a whole new system for the way that the tags and labeling were going to be done, the way that the inspectors were going to be tracked. I mean, they really revolutionized their system because of these issues that we found. And so that wasn't anything that made a report, right? It wasn't any kind of splashy headline to go along with it. But in terms of safety and impact, really proud of the work that my team had done on that.
How do you prevent an office like this? Because sometimes it's like, I think it would be easy to catalog this office as a hammer looking for a nail, right? Like it's like all right, great. Like you are looking for the little thing that's gonna bring up but it's not that big of a deal, Shannon. Like you didn't have to, why do we need a reporting mechanism? Like, why don't you just talk to accounting? We need to talk to the fire department. They can have a conversation and they'll figure it out. Like, why do you believe that these types of investigations, which honestly, if you did publish a report on that, I don't know how many people would read it, right? Like, because they'd be like, all right, cool. Well, government is doing what they're supposed to do, right? Like they didn't burn down a building. Awesome. Like you don't get an award for that, right? Like, so it's kind of difficult to drum up excitement or support for an office like this because of the fact that it seems like it is sometimes just going after very minuscule details, but it sounds like that's not always the case.
No, I mean, I think that
or not often the case.
Yeah, the things that people care about and should care about, right? Taxpayer dollars, whether that's $2,500 or $2.5 million, right? That one of the things that I really came to appreciate from my time in New York City Council was that there's no bottomless well of funding, that there are discrete funds that are available, and that every time you're losing dollars to waste or to fraud, those are dollars that can't go into senior citizens programs or firehouses or after-school programs or any of the other things that really matter to people. And so, you know, kind of that's what I'd say about the importance, and obviously anything that deals with kind of safety and welfare. It wasn't my squad, but we, you know, DOI every like 4 or 5 years has some big case where there's 40 people arrested as part of building inspectors who've been taking money, right? So think about that and all your building collapses. So inspectors who are taking money where they're not conducting inspections. So whether that's things up to safety code, whether that's kind of quality of products and the hazard that that presents to the citizens in that space. Like it's incredible.
Yeah.
And so it starts with someone just, you know, taking $100 and looking the other way, but the implications of it are so vast.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that I would tell people. It's like, yeah, you know,
Sometimes you're catching something, I think, before it becomes a thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that even the small things, I think, are still worth addressing because people should be doing it right.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, when the Office of the Inspector General was being created in Atlanta, off of a similar, you know, 1800s case, I guess,
Right.
but that happened in our lifetime. There were corruption scandals. I think if anybody who was here in Atlanta, we had a lot of folks who are here, been here for over 15 years. You can remember every headline, every time you talked about city government, any candidate interview we had, any leadership breakfast we had, the topic was always around corruption or like the need for transparency. It was everyone's talking point. In particularly like 2017, 18, it was like transparency will come back to City Hall. We will build trust again in City Hall. And a huge part of that rallying cry was we are going to set up an Office of Inspector General. Like that is going to be something that we do so that we can catch corruption, abuse, fraud, that we can catch these things so that we don't need to arbitrate these issues in the headlines. But when they were debating the creation of that office, there were two things in the recommendation of the creation of that office that were left out that I want to understand why you may think they may have been left out and how that may affect your office. The first thing that was left out was a whistleblower policy, right? Like that the Office of the Inspector General has an actual a process around what whistleblowing really looks like, right? The second thing that was put in there was access to separate legal counsel. So that those were two recommendations that were put in the original OIG in Atlanta. Like we got to have that, and then they were stripped out. Those two things seem to be at play today, right? Can you explain the importance of what a whistleblower policy is? Because not everybody may be familiar with what that means or looks like, particularly for an OIG office. And then, okay, legal schmeagle, like why does it matter? Like you can't you just call your lawyer, they'll call their lawyers. Let's talk about access to legal counsel. And we can get to that second, but why don't we start with whistleblower policy?
Yeah, and thank you for saying whistleblower. I almost forgot. Today, as it turns out, total happenstance, didn't do it by design, I promise. It's National Whistleblower Appreciation Day.
Oh, if you look, yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
So
if you look under your seats, we are. Trust me, we're huge celebrators. Yeah. Huge celebrators. Yeah.
July 30th, 1778. Here's the nerd part, right?
Yes.
July 30th, 1778.
Obviously.
The nation signs its first law calling for all those in the service of the government and those who live in the government to report on misconduct or frauds observed by its officers. So July 30th.
Amazing.
Here we are.
Yeah.
So whistleblowers very clearly play a big role in the work of any Office of Inspector General. And because, you can have as many affirmative programs as you'd like, but when it comes down to it, tips are what get fraud, right? The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has an annual survey where they are the fraud experts across the world, and they figure out the best ways. And so, looking at audit and internal controls and all these things, every year, the leading detector for fraud, it's tips, right? So it's people calling in, it's see something, say something, which has been fully kind of co-opted by the IG space, right? Like terrorism, this is, if you see some misconduct, right, bring it to the attention. So it's hugely important that people know that they can come to a space and report misconduct and that something's going to be done about it. But it is equally important that then those people who do that are protected. How do you ask people, how do you create some duty for people to come forward and do the right thing if then you're not going to look out for them in the back end? So that the whistleblower provision, as it originally was crafted with the Office of the Inspector General, did two things, right? It said it was essentially a couple of thou shalt nots, right? So thou shalt not prevent anyone from coming forward to the Office of the Inspector General to report misconduct, and then thou shalt not exact any reprisals on anyone for having come forward. So it feels like, oh, okay, that's whistleblower, right? It's not nothing.
Sure.
But where are the details? Well, what happens if you do? What's the process for an examination of that if that happens, right? Where are the penalties? Where is the show that you're serious about this part of it? Last year, we saw a number of changes to the charter, and one of them was the one that I think was it was an easy thing to give, and in fact, we got it, because it was expressing our office's commitment to whistleblowers. So while we exercise discretion about the matters that we review, we cannot look at everything. Our resources are not nearly sufficient to look at everything that comes in. And there's often not enough information to pursue all the complaints that come in. But we exercise this discretion. But if it's the case that regardless of what issue someone might have brought to the attention of the Office of the Inspector General or someone else, if you've made some claim of fraud, waste, abuse, corruption, and that then were retaliated against because of it, we committed as an office and put that into law that we are going to investigate every instance where that is the claim, right?
So if someone says, I saw something, so I'm gonna say something,
Okay.
you are committed to investigating whatever that might be.
If it's I saw something, I'm gonna say something, and then you got fired for it.
Okay, so there was some retaliatory thing that happened.
Then you bring that to the office because the saw something, say something was a fraud, waste, abuse, corruption, right? This isn't other HR kind of things, right? That if that was what you were reporting and you got retaliated against, we kind of built into the law that we are just that committed to protecting whistleblowers, that we are going to look into all of that. But in terms of the kind of ramifications and process and things, those were absent from the original iteration.
So in terms of legal counsel, like this is something that definitely over the last 24 months or so has become clearer in Atlanta. There is one law department for the city of Atlanta. And that law department is not just it's not the mayor's law department. It's not just the council's law department. It is the law department for the city of Atlanta, meaning the same legal advice that is given to the mayor is also the same legal advice that is given to the council. And it is not like, oh, this is your plug to legal. This is like, you cannot seek outside legal counsel. Like, you are prohibited from seeking outside legal counsel. I'm sure there are exceptions if there's like in circumstances of A, B, and C, but very rarely is it permitted that a council member can just be like, you know what, I don't really agree with what the law department just told me, so I'm gonna go find another legal opinion. Or if a bunch of lawyers are like, hey, by the way, counsel, like, that's silly. What you're being advised doesn't make any sense. They can't be like, oh, well, I take that on legal counsel, right? Like I have to still go to my legal counsel. So it sounds like an IG's office as well falls under this same purview. So do you have to still get the same legal counsel that the mayor and the council are getting? And isn't that weird given that those are the folks that you are potentially doing in the offices that you are investigating?
So mostly yes, and definitely yes.
Okay.
To the questions you just posed. So there's an exception in the charter for the Office of the Inspector General where if we identify a conflict and the board approves, then we can seek outside counsel.
Okay.
There are a number of challenges with that, including the fact that a lot of law firms and kind of large entities that would be kind of go-to, like if you're trying to go to a firm like the one where I was brought up, they're trying to do business with the city, right? So what was born of a conflict within the city then has this kind of full range of conflicts for trying to get outside counsel. So there's difficulty there. So there's an avenue, but that's not ideal, right? You want to have someone who's in-house, kind of trusted, on staff, being paid already, as opposed to exorbitant legal fees kind of outside. And for the conflict part of it, yeah, it's weird, right? That you can imagine for a number of city departments, that blanket law of, everyone should be going through the law department makes a lot of sense because the issues that arise are largely from without, right? So external people suing and having issues. But the very nature of an Office of Inspector General is that the majority of kind of the legal issues and concerns that we have are going to be from within. So disputes about things like access, for example, are ones that, just their very nature, we received, in a non-hypothetical way, received a letter in response to a request for direct access to certain city system. And the letter was from, kind of the mayor's office formally. And it kind of ended with, if you have any questions about this, please contact the city attorney. It's like, okay, wait. So the same city attorney who is supposed to be representing our office, you're saying, talk to my lawyer, right? And right, how does that then work?
Yeah.
So I'm supposed to talk to the city attorney about the position that the mayor's office is staking out, but then what does that mean for the position that our office is staking out,
Yeah.
right? It's an obvious conflict.
Yeah.
And it's one that pops up over and over.
So is there, just to be clear, right, is there circumstance where the Office of the Inspector General has not been able to completely conduct its investigations or complete its investigations because it has not had access to proper legal counsel? Is that if you had legal counsel, would any of your separate investigations, excuse me, if you had separate legal counsel, would any of your investigations change?
Yes. So I'll put this in a hypothetical way, right? One issue that comes up is about privileged documents. So documents identified as privileged, communications. And so there's an argument, a strong argument to be made for the fact that the Office of Inspector General should have access to things that might otherwise to outsiders be privileged, right?
Yeah.
That's an argument you can't make when then the privileged claims are being made by the city attorney in that case. And so if you had some in-house counsel that's able to kind of lay out effectively all the reasons why, well, no, these things aren't privileged, and so the office should then have access, think about the world of documents that opens up.
Yeah.
In a hypothetical world where you have a case where someone in the law department is the subject, then what does it mean when we do kind of routine things like an email review? The way that the process is set up now, all of the emails from anyone who's in the law department would be automatically withheld because they might be potentially privileged, right? Potentially, not actually. So then there would have to then be in city attorney's law department kind of review to determine what is actually privileged versus not. Do you know how long that takes? And at the same time, we're waiting. And then that means that the city attorneys then who are conducting, the people in the law department, the attorneys in the law department who are conducting that review, then are privy to all of the things that so yeah, there's a world where absolutely you not having in-house counsel impacts the direct investigations that we conduct.
So if you are in New York, there was like an inspector general for a multitude of departments, but we got one inspector general, right? That is over all departments. Does that include the law department? Are you
Theoretically,
allowed, are you able to do investigations of the law department?
Yes, but for the reasons that I just described, difficult.
So if someone said, hey, I'm council member X, and I believe that I'm being given political advice, not being given legal advice from legal counsel.
Right.
Please help me because I need help, Inspector General. What would you do? What's the process if that were to hypothetically happen?
I can't even imagine, because part of that, like I said, email reviews kind of bread and butter of investigations now.
How should that happen? What should happen in that case?
Yeah, so I mean, that example is dicey in some ways because, one of the things that we do, as a matter of course, is that we're not here to second guess the day-to-day operational decision-making within departments, right? We're here for looking at specific fraud, waste, abuse, corruption. It's not that we're trying to supplant any of their kind of decisions with ours and what we think is right. That's not the purpose of the office. And so that's a tight example because, gosh, it's like, okay, the legal advice that's political as opposed to just based on law, theoretically, then we would want to have some either in-house, if we had the ability to do in-house, kind of full legal review so we could see, okay, no, the law actually says this thing, and what was told to the council member is counter to that. Like, that's black and white.
Yeah.
I feel like with a lot of legal opinions, you're not going to get something quite so black and white, but let's stick with the black and white there. What you'd need to do would be to see the advice that would be given. And there, unlike the example I was saying before, where there's a world where things are potentially privileged or not, that communication would be 100% privileged, right? Like privilege is a very narrow thing, but it's the solicitation or the receiving of advice that would be advice. We wouldn't have access to any of that. I mean, theoretically, I guess if this was the council member, that council member could then waive the privilege to then share it with us. And so we would get to see that, but it's complicated.
So, when we think fraud, I think you see fraud, waste, corruption, a lot of these things, and you have kind of streamlined ways of thinking about what these things are, and they sound almost normal in a way, like these are just kind of day-to-day operations. But like the last time I was thinking about fraud and abuse and corruption inside of City Hall was like some dude like bought a bunch of guns like with city money and was like putting them in his house. Like there was like
the CFO.
Yeah, the CFO. Yeah, like that, hypothetically. But actually, like I just like want to. I don't know. Sometimes you just you're like so good at like explaining these things, and I'm like, shake me, like be like, like. Maybe I just watch too much reality TV, but like, I feel like the city of Atlanta needs a shake here. Like you called a state of emergency and you said it in the calmest, nicest way that you're in a state of emergency. But like if folks are we seeing in this administration stuff that is as serious as the chief financial officer of the city of Atlanta using Atlanta cash to be able to buy guns and store them in their house and call it city work? Like, is that the state of emergency we're in? Or is it that like somebody just, didn't show their gas receipts, right? Like I think that there is a binary thought on this. Like, are we in this state of emergency, like, which feels like that? Or is it just there's some things that we need to get better at and procedurally we need to get better? Help me understand that, because as an average person in the city, you're just like, okay, what's the emergency? Explain to me the emergency here.
Yeah. So the emergency is that, let's say, could be gas receipts, but could be the guns and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. The emergency is that the office is now in a position where if we're presented with either of those sets of allegations, we're not able to investigate. The emergency is not having access to
Whoa,
appropriate
whoa, whoa, go back.
records.
What are you saying? Like, I don't understand. It sounded right, but I don't understand it. Like,
Right.
you're telling me that if I'm like, I'm in the, I'm in the finance office, and my boss is buying some guns, right? With city credit cards, going to gun shows, buying these guns, taking them to their house. This is a real example, by the way. I can't believe that that's true. Like, and so I take it back to my house. I used city money to be able to do that. I see that that happens. I feel like I need to tell somebody about this. Your office would be the natural place for me to go,
Yes,
to be
sir.
able to be like, hey, Inspector General, I would like to tell you that my boss is buying a bunch of guns and storing them in their house. Will you please take a look at this? Because I think it is fraud, abuse, and corruption.
Yes.
What prevents you from being like, on it? I got you.
So we'd say, first, we'd never say, I got you.
Okay,
So
well-
that implies.
Okay.
that all
Yeah, oh, yeah,
everything-
I got it.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for your submission.
Your
I got it. Yeah,
submission.
yeah. Okay, so when I fill out the Google form and then it's like,
Right.
all right, thank you, I got you,
Right.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I got it. Yeah.
So, all right?
I got
All
you, I
right,
got
so
you.
thank you so much for your submission. For
Yes.
you having reported and blown the
Yes.
whistle on something you perceive to be problematic, right? But it's the, okay, how do we go about investigating that? If it's a matter of then seeking certain records, certain invoices, certain things, do we have access to the database that gives us that? Gosh, we're talking about revoking that access. Okay. If we then have to use the system that's been established using a custodian of records, then are we going to that person, and is that person then telling everyone they encounter, yes, the Office of the Inspector General just asked about this, so that then the subject then hears about it? Is it then that subject then being given that opportunity to destroy evidence, to talk to other individuals, to taint what might be their testimony? Is it the, when we're ready to then interview someone, are they being told, well, don't participate, or, the law department should be sitting in on that interview, where very clearly the law department represents the city and not individuals, right? They're not their personal attorneys, they're representing the city.
Right.
So to the extent that there might be a conflict there because someone might be involved, is that then hindering the person coming forward? We actually conduct that interview, but unbeknownst to us, but now knownst to us.
Is that the opposite of unbeknownst?
It is today.
I have been wondering
It
that
is-
for such a long
it
time.
is
Thank you.
today. Knownst
Yeah,
to us.
Knowns to us. I'm gonna use that all week.
That the person having just been interviewed in a confidential interview with the Office of the Inspector General, where it is clear that it is a confidential interview because that's what investigations
Right.
are, that some deputy commissioner or commissioner in that department has been asking, I need you to tell me the content of that confidential interview, so that then leadership knows about the things that happened in this confidential space. So when I describe a state of emergency, it's that parade of
yeah.
horribles that ultimately end up preventing the office from doing its job.
Is that
ultimately
happening
end up
now?
Yes, sir.
So let me repeat that. That is happening now.
That is what prompted my use of the term emergency. I don't use such a term lightly. I am not some zealot. I am fairly measured and conservative by nature. We uncovered documents reflecting those things and have also been otherwise experiencing those things, such that it presented well, how are we going to proceed with our investigations? if now we know that there's a world where anyone who we interview might have also received this directive to tell leadership in their department, who might be the subjects of this investigation, the content of our entire interview, what does that mean? Are we prepared to go forward with that interview? Are we prepared for basically this being everything that we're talking about being disclosed? What does it mean for us to have asked a person in an interview for documentation? They describe a set of facts. And so we say, oh, do you have documents about that? And they said, yes, we've got an email showing that. Great. Can you give it to us? And they do. What does it mean then to see some memo noting that they attempted to revoke the email, right? The recall of an email after it was given, right? To prevent us from having access to the record that was clearly sought as part of an investigation, where we're supposed to have immediate access to records, and the only qualification to that is, documents that might be privileged or confidential, and there's the same asterisk that I already said about it being privileged. But in a world where that email is on its face, neither privileged nor confidential, what justification is there for that blatant charter violation? This intentional obstruction of investigation. It's nothing other than that.
Yeah. Is this just anecdotal, like it's kind of a one-off exception, it's happened, or is this indicative? You have said that your office has dozens of investigations that it has not been able to complete yet. Is on a scale of gas receipts to guns, like buying guns, where do the majority of these investigations kind of fall? Are they mostly kind of administrative things that can be solved through procedural, changes that would happen, or are they indicative of a bigger problem at City Hall?
Both. So it's diverse. We have a number. I think the last reported was 85. I think we're up to, Shelby could say 90 plus probably now active
So you have 90 plus active investigations
that are diverse in nature.
Are diverse in nature. And of those 90 plus, of those, how many are you not able to move forward with because of what you have called obstruction to the process?
I think we have a number on that. I would say that there's probably not a case that we have where there's not some, well, gosh, I can ask this, but what's going to happen, right? That are what should be normal course, how you approach an investigation, standard fare. That now there is this second guessing and the strategic, and if we talk to this person and what's going to happen, that mindset pervades the entire office.
Yeah.
That's every investigation we are having to approach with those things in mind. So every single one.
When you went to council and you chose to go through public comment, right? Because what you said was you tried to get in touch with them in multitude of ways and did not get responses. That you 80%, I think in your last governing meeting, you said 80% of the correspondence that you have sent over to leadership, you have not received any response.
So separate things, right? There's the how we're able to function as an office in terms of conducting investigations. But then one of the things that we find when we conclude an investigation where we either found individual misconduct or not, or where we've identified some corruption vulnerabilities or hazards, we make policy and procedure recommendations so that they can be addressed, right? Let's improve the government. Let's either correct something that's vulnerability that's already been exploited, or prevent something from happening because we've identified where this could be a rich, ripe area. So that SAT was talking about the responses to our policy and procedure recommendations.
Okay.
It matters because to me, I think it's illustrative of the posture and how you take the information that's coming from this office. That in most places, there's an engagement with the office because, oh gosh, all right, you've shown me that, okay, nobody's stolen from the warehouse yet, but we found that there's no lock on the door. Let's put a lock on the door, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's try to prevent something bad from happening. That I think everyone can agree that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Right? We identify where there are issues, where there are conflicts between certain policies and laws. You want to make sure that people know what they should be doing. So we make a recommendation. Okay, perhaps you should conform these things so that there's no confusion and people know the right things. A lot of this just feels like, well, obviously, sure, these are things that should be done. Now, not all policy and procedure recommendations, because there are some that for a number of reasons, it's, we don't have the resources to do this, or this isn't, operationally, this creates some problem, right? There are a number of reasons why sometimes things aren't implemented, and that's fine. And we might still make the recommendation, and there's a thank you, but no thank you because these reasons. That's fine. But what we've been experiencing is that we weren't even getting responses in the first instance to these requests. And by responses, I don't really mean literally the email received, thank you. It's the substantive, yes, I accept this recommendation, or no, I don't, because. Because once you're in that space, then once it's acceptance, then we follow up to see implementation. Okay, you said you were going to do this thing. We're going to check in 6 months down the road. Have you done this thing? Usually it's the implementation phase where there's lags and gaps and people said, okay, no, we got it. And then they just don't get around to doing it. But here, it's that first instance, do you accept or reject, that we're not getting that. So that's the 80%, 20%. It's separate from the investigations. That's not part of an emergency. But like I said, it feels like that's something that is illustrative of how you're taking our recommendations. Like there is for some of this, like I said, it's low-hanging fruit. Why wouldn't there be a response to this? Or why is there a level of defensiveness in what is supposed to be a recommendation so that government's made better? Why isn't that a shared goal? We should be working together.
You've said this to council, and last couple questions, and we'll open it to folks to ask questions. You've said this, that, okay, like, I'm calling that my office is in an emergency. Council, I need you to act. The mayor's office has responded to some of the things that you have said, mostly in the media, not necessarily. I'd be curious whether you've had any direct interactions with that office. But how receptive are elected officials to what seems like a no-brainer? You're offering recommendations so that we don't end up in further conflict. But when you came in and you made public comment, a lot of the response from council was shock and awe, and they would not go into executive session because they felt that you're saying it's an emergency, but we don't really know if it's an emergency. Is it an emergency? I don't know.
It was declared a non-emergency by council, who's supposed to represent us both.
Got it. So legal counsel said it's a non-emergency, which would be odd if they did with a commissioner of fire or something like that. If they were like, we're in a state of emergency, and they were like, I don't think it's that bad of a burn, right? I think
that's exactly right.
So I'm curious what the state of the relationship of your office and council is, and what needs to because there's been rumor of there might be legislation that's coming down to actually potentially do some oversight on your office, that maybe you've gone rogue and you're taking people's cell phones and doing all this. Like, demystify that for us. Like, if that's not actually happening, then what does need to happen with council, and what is the relationship with the mayor's office? And then we'll open it up.
Yeah, so the demystification first, for the kind of 3 things that were leveled against the office as how dare you, this is unbelievable, must be misconduct. Let's be clear, right? 1, it was knocking on people's doors. So 1, standard fare for an Office of Inspector General to look for witnesses and confront witnesses where they might be. But in this particular instance, it was a city employee working from home. So the home becomes the office. That might as well have been knocking on the door of City Hall, right? So you're knocking on, harassing, no, during the business workday at what was their workspace. So that's 1. 2, the taking people's phones. Well, you mean their city phones? Okay, right? Not your personal iPhone. This is your city phone, which contains city records. So yes, under the charter, access to, because obviously you're trying to gather information for an investigation. Yeah, we're getting information where it might live. A city device with city records, yeah, that's where we're gonna go. Nothing rogue about that. And finally, being up on people's cash apps. Well, it's very clear, right? You've made reference to the raft of public corruption that precipitated formation of this office. Guess what? While actually one of those cases did involve a bag of cash, it's 2024, y'all. It's not a bag of cash. People are paying bribes through cash apps, right? So when we have investigations where there's some allegation about that, yes, we have subpoena authority. We obtain financial records because that's how you detect if in fact someone received money for doing something that they should not have been doing as part of their city job. So this is standard fare. Like the three things leveled against, like, how dare you? It's like, well, these are all just things that we're just doing our jobs. We're just doing our jobs. And in those cases, we were allowed to. And as I said before, the emergency is trying to make sure that we cannot do it. And it seems that that's intentional. To your other questions, I guess I'd say this. We described a state of emergency for the office. We outlined some of the obstructive practices that we found documentation to memorialize that. No one has followed up with the office to discuss any of that. No one. As a member of the public, it would be interesting to know whether, because while no one followed up at the office, there was a Twitter that went out, which
Well, you just called it a Twitter, so we know.
I know, I don't.
It's all good. I got it. Yeah, yeah. A Twitter went out. Yes. Yes. You made that clear. Yeah, yeah. You made that clear. Yeah.
Notes to me that.
Yeah.
But yes, there was a tweet X, what have you, that went out saying, oh, you know, we'd sure like the names of things behind these allegations. But nobody ever asked us, right? So we had to find out about that through secondhand, thirdhand. There was media coverage of that tweet, right? But no one, we're in city government. No one asked, okay, hey, you said there was all this documentation. Show us the money, right? Nobody asked that. So after a while, I was like, oh, well, you didn't ask, but here you go, right? So we then provided the mayor's office with the, you know, to the extent that one might be seeking through Twitter, X, what have you, or otherwise this information, here it is.
Yeah.
Here's the backup showing exactly what I laid out. There hasn't been any engagement with the office about that.
But you have a board as well, right? So
I do.
that governing board, has there been any engagement with the board?
Oh, so about the specific substantive issues that we outlined, no. About a broader sense of their access issues that might be helped by legislation, right? So not the kind of legislation that we anticipate that's going to hurt the office, but if we had some of the legislative acts that we sought last year and would look to kind of enhance for this year, if we had those things, then some of the issues that I outlined might have been addressed, not all, but some of them. So they are pursuing support along one avenue, but in terms of the kind of active engagement with the things that we identified as creating a state of emergency, not yet.
Is this something we should be even thinking about with the, I mean, a lot of times, does this get attributed to the mayor? Maybe the mayor's like, I don't know that these things are happening. You're talking about a commissioner over there, a department over there. I was in Memphis, like, I'm not like clear, like, I'm not like, I wasn't there for it. I don't know that it happened. Like, you're blaming me for something Like, why are you coming at me? Like, go after the folks that did it. I didn't do it. Like, does this start from the top, or are you, is this, let me just ask the question. Is this a corrupt administration or no? Like, is this am I supposed to be worried as a resident? Like, this is what I was worried about under previous administrations. I was like, oh, damn, we didn't know all that was going on. We should have known that was going on, so we could have caught that corruption right there and then. And now we all have revisioned. Everybody who was, making money off of that previous administration is now like, oh my God, what a terrible administration. And I'm like, you worked in it. Like, I mean, like, you were a part of the corruption. Like, and so this revisionist history is one easy thing to do, but we're living in it now. So you tell me, is this an administration that, as the public, needs to be worried about as it relates to fraud, abuse, and corruption? Or is that just still yet to be determined? Is it really an emergency around that issue with this administration?
All right. So, like I said about Boss Tweed, the things that were happening in that era are so striking, and do Wikipedia it, all of you, right? Because these issues of who you know to get a job, the issues of who you know to get a contract, the inside dealings, the kickbacks, the padding of invoices, like all of the various forms, they were happening in 1860s, 70s, they're happening now. That's across the country, that's at every level of government. It's universal. It is absolutely universal. The emergency is making sure that the very entities that are in place to detect that can do their jobs.
Okay.
And what I'm not here to talk about who's corrupt in a corrupt administration or anything like that. That's not the goal of this office. Editorialization, we don't do any of that, right? We conduct investigations, we find facts, but we have to be allowed to do that. And I think it is an emergency, not just for us not to be able to do our jobs, but it's problematic if it looks like we're intentionally being kept from being able to do our jobs. And the public should be concerned about that. And when I say it's an emergency, we've been doing good work. If we can't continue to do our work because of these roadblocks that have been set up to keep us from doing our work, that's something that every taxpayer, every person who cares about the success of the city of Atlanta should care about.
Okay. We're going to open it up for questions. If you could say your name, and the camera will catch your question as well. But yes, we'll get started. Yes, go ahead.
Shannon, like I said at the beginning, thank you so much for speaking on this. I came to get a bit of insight because also thank you for telling us that it's National Whistleblower Day. That's right. That's my entire caseload. So I have a bunch of whistles on my keychain. And so thank you also for declaring a state of emergency on this matter. To take it a step further, it's a state of emergency in the state. There's a dangerous trend emerging in the exact same way. I have clients who make OIG reports. We have emails where they're tipping OIG off, hey, so-and-so is coming with a complaint. We also have instances where OIG is going line for line through the complaint, helping commissioners clean up the act. Like, we can see it in real time happening. FOIA is also an extreme problem here in the city, also the state, to the point where I think I'm going to trial on open records. I don't even know if that's ever happened. It's happened. Oh, okay. Well, we're going to trial on open records. But stories have been killed on the types of things that are like big fraud, wasted abuse, literally pick a door here in the state. The stories have been killed. Like I said, OIG has not been able to do anything. We're at the point now where attorney generals are going rogue and doing things that are completely uncharted, big conflicts of interest. So what, in your opinion, is it going to take? Is it going to take a judge to finally just say, hey, like somebody bringing the case and a judge ruling on this and calling it what it is? Is the media going to be able to bring attention to this? Because like I said, and it's just my case, but again, I'm starting to see that trend where, okay, somebody clearly got to them. What can you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that transparency matters, right?
right?
I've been in my nerd space and was looking up a whole bunch of historical stuff about the sunlight is the best disinfectant. I was doing something and I was like, I just don't know who said it. So I looked it up. It's Justice Brandeis. And he said that from before he was a justice on the Supreme Court, but when he was a lawyer, and it turns out he was talking about municipal corruption in City Hall, right? That was part of his history. And then he later said, sunlight is said to be the best of disinfectants. So I think the shining a light on these issues, as you said, it's making sure that members of the public know about what's going on. And that, you know, one of the other criticisms leveled at me during the public comment was, how dare you go to the media? How dare we go to the media? We're the people's watchdog. We're here to serve the public. You reach the public through the media, right? So I think, yes, you telling as many people to try to shine a light on some of these issues helps a lot, right? I have to have faith that it's that, because that's what's happening with our office too. The issues that our office is facing and the attempt to try to create oversight, right? Which is just, it's smoke and mirrors, right? Oversight has the benefit of, well, of course, oversight's not a bad thing. We exercise oversight, and checks and balances are something everyone could get behind.
Yep.
Don't be fooled, right? It's things to try to make our jobs harder. So if this is happening and people aren't reacting from the political landscape, you know, people who could take acts to stop it from happening, then your only way of raising an issue is making sure that the public knows, so that then there's public pressure brought to bear so that these various power entities can do the right thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that's why we're here. I didn't say anything about our buttons, right? It's incredible to me to be in a space to have to essentially be an advocate, right? I'm like, buttons. When we ordered these in the office, I think the actual word was a campaign button. I'm like, we're not a campaign, right? We're a government office. And yet we need to and want to and have to bring attention to everything that's going on. And so we've got these buttons, stand with OIG, because if the public's not standing with us, this office won't exist, right? And it'll be an office in name only, which is worse than no office at all, because it's the sham of oversight. It won't be oversight.
Yes.
Jim Hartford. I want to follow up with you in your description of your structural inability to investigate city attorneys. Because I've seen on many occasions city attorneys essentially take a dive at a case. And I've always sort of attributed that to the fact that in each and every case, it was against a local developer, and the city attorneys were too spineless to take on a developer with expensive attorneys. But if instead they were taking cash on the table or being influenced by some political to do that, there would be no way to know, right?
I mean, we could feel, let's say someone in the office tipped us off, right? Thank you for your submission. If someone's in the know, we could feel that. But the structural impediment to us actually effectively being able to investigate it. What does it look like? You can't get the media, right?
When we have to submit our request using keywords that identify exactly what we're investigating, so that the exposure and disclosure of how it is, right? The keywords for an email, it's the keys to the kingdom. You see exactly what's happening. So various people knowing about your investigation, spreading the word, tainting witnesses, not being able to actually get the email records or other hard copy documentation that you require. All of those things are, I mean, theoretically, we could investigate, but what is that investigation going to look like? How effective is it going to be? Are you going to be able to move from point A to point B? And if the answer to that is no, because of these intentional structural impediments, then that's a problem, and the public needs to be aware of that.
Yeah, Matt.
Thank you for the admission. In the city's response to your investigation into the former Commissioner of Human Resources and particularly to your request for super user access to records. Former CEO of Oregon said, "We believe that the OIG and other compliance organizations should conduct investigations in partnership with the administration to ensure the safeguarding of records. This administration has been in discussions with you on the process to access information that allows for timely response and safeguards those records in accordance with law and best practices." Kind of a two-part question. Is this concept of partnership typical or atypical between offices of Inspector General and executive offices, let's say nationally? And then can you, if not the content, at least discuss the tenor of those conversations?
Sure, so partnership
Office of
between
Inspector
offices.
General and those government entities they oversee is natural. Because as I said, there should be partnership. You should be working together to advance the shared goal of government operations with integrity. That absolutely should be happening, right? It does not have to be an adversarial system. It should not be an adversarial system. People in leadership should want to know, gosh, tell me, you know, where there's a problem, right? The old proverbial, my slip is showing, tell me, right? Like, right, I'm dating myself, slips, right? It's my mother, right? Used to wear slips, my mother.
I had a tag on my jeans this morning, and one of my team members told me.
That's
about it. So
right.
yeah, it was
You
very
want
nice.
to be told
One of-
about it.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that kind of
Thank you,
partnership
Nadine.
and collaboration, yes, right? That's not what's being discussed there. That's not. The let's work in partnership for you to get information is use these people and use these methods to get information. That way we can see everything that you're asking, and we'll get you the information that we think you should have. That was actually said to me. What do you mean direct access? We can get you the things that we think you should have. That is not how it works in other places. That is not how well-functioning offices of Inspector General conduct their work. How could it? On its face, that doesn't make any sense. And that probably answers your second question too.
Good.
Hi, my name is Evan Barrington Ward. I'm a candidate for Atlanta City Council. I have two questions, if I may. But the first one is quick. What is the public engagement beyond events like this? Are you going to the town hall meetings? Are you going to the MPUs? Those type of things. Like, talk to me about the ways that the public can be engaged. Is there trainings that you all offer on good government and not being the subject of investigations from your office?
Wonderful, love all that. So the answer to that is we're trying to do as many things as possible.
So we've been reaching out to the kind of neighborhood associations because we've already started to touch on the NPUs. We did a presentation before the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board in June. So reaching the kind of leadership of NPUs to describe these issues. That meeting was, you want to talk about affirming. Shout out to Amy. I was there at that meeting. As we outlined in real time these issues that we had, APAB immediately said, this is a problem. Recognized the service and value of our office and how that value is being denied the citizens of Atlanta, and immediately passed a resolution saying, we support the independence of the Office of the Inspector General, and referred it to its governance committee to think of additional ways that it could show its support. So that's bearing fruit. That's great. We are happy to speak in any, so if anyone in the room, you're connected with organizations, we're happy to speak anywhere where we're invited. And maybe we should be showing in places we're not. I don't know, right? We need to be spreading that word for the engagement. And in terms of training, we do anti-corruption lectures and programs within city employees, and the idea is that eventually we'll branch into the vendor community as well, because the idea is that we want to make sure people know what they should and shouldn't be doing. And while there's some things that should absolutely kind of be taken for granted, you don't want to make assumptions, because there are pockets of the government where if you're entirely enmeshed in an area where everyone's doing wrong, maybe you don't know what right is anymore. So we have these tailored trainings for each department to speak to the particular vulnerabilities that might come up in the course of their employment, so that we're all on the same page. We give everyone our blue cards to report, because it's so critical that if there are some issues, if there's something that hair on the back of your neck stood up a little bit, that you report to us so we can look into it. And unlike the word that's been out there, we're not out looking for dirt. We're fact finders. If it turns out that this thing that someone brought to our attention, that there's no there, then we close the investigation and that's it, right? We're not trying to make headlines with making someone look bad, but where there is something bad that's happening that should be identified. And yes, for the sake of transparency and sunlight and the best disinfectant, that should then be a subject that's spread to the public, so the public knows what's happening.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So under the agreement of City Council, the Atlanta Police Foundation, City Council is supposed to be appointing 2 members to the Police Foundation board. They have not done that as of yet. From my understanding, if there are council representatives or city representatives on that board would be subject to some sunshine laws or FOIA requests. Is that your understanding of that? And would your office have oversight once those folks are, or jurisdiction once those folks are appointed by council?
That's a good question. So
One of the
one of the
in our
areas,
jurisdiction are what's called the BACEs, right? So the boards, authorities, commissions, et cetera, the formal term. That E is et cetera really burns up one of the guys in the office. He's like, how's that E for formal? But we have BACEs. I don't know. It's something that, it's a good question and something that I'll educate myself on after this, whether the mere appointment from a city entity, city council, the mayor, would then render that board or organization a BACE such that it would fall under our umbrella. I don't know the answer to that, but it's a good one and we could look at it. If it did then make it a BACE, then yes, it would fall under our jurisdiction.
I'm going to get to a couple other folks in the room. I wanted to get, there were a few questions that came in online as well. I'm going to, for the folks who are online, I'm going to consolidate some of the questions, and some of them we have answered. So one of the things was just like, what is the role of, is this a national issue at all? Like, should someone in Wisconsin or New York or Chicago be, looking at this or caring about what, I mean, obviously they should care, but are there any national implications of what's happening in Atlanta? And what is the role of either the federal or the state government in potentially intervening if there is not, is there a mechanism for intervention outside of just directly dealing with it in-house?
No, I don't think it's a national issue. I think people should always be concerned when entities that are set up to protect taxpayers, to protect the public fisc, when those are in jeopardy. I think that yes, there should always be some concern and consternation. In terms of whether the state or at the nation level there could be intervention here, I mean, I wouldn't think so, right? I'll have to think about that.
Are there any state laws
I hadn't
that
had any thought of like, trying to get the governor to intercede here. I hadn't, I was honest, I hadn't, that's not.
Are there state laws that kind of either dictate or say anything about what the OIG in a city in Georgia can or can't do?
So this is also for those who don't know, the state of Georgia has an Office of Inspector General that is in, still relatively new. Like I think it's less than 20 years young. And so it is still kind of building itself. There was great legislation that was passed last year to help bolster and solidify that office, which is great. But otherwise, some of our work is governed by some of the state law parameters. So the state whistleblower law then kind of applies, clearly state open records and open meetings things, you know, our work is governed by that. But no, we're not, there's not like some state municipal IG, right? So when that great legislation was passed last year to benefit the state Office of Inspector General, that was just for the state Office of Inspector General. It wasn't for us, unfortunately. We could have really benefited from that. And had I known that it was as in the process as much as I was, I might give you a shout. Like Yana Mitchell's here, who's the intergov for the city. We'd actually had conversations about trying to partner with the state to advance some legislation that might serve both of our offices, which would be great. But I take responsibility. I feel like we missed the boat with that. I did, but yeah, there's nothing inherently dictated by the state.
Got it. And
And hi. So quick question just for understanding. If I guess there is an issue between your office, the city, your office, the council, who resolves this issue? Your office, the board, like who resolves it? If there is a resolve, who does that?
I wish I knew.
It's relational, right? I mean, we're supposed to have certain authority under the charter. That's being violated. I'm not going to mince words on that. That immediate access to records and the way that we're getting that, I mean, there's guidance. We have learned about guidance that went out at the department level that was to treat Office of Inspector General requests like open records requests, which then has the disadvantage of it's going to a custodian, it's being spread to everyone, you know. And it's great that the state has such transparency laws and that the John Q. public on the street can get certain things, but that's not what this office is. And the idea that treating our requests like open records requests is at all in conformity with immediate access under the charter, serious issue. So, you know, what happens when we express that we're encountering these issues, identify them as charter violations? You know, absent us, I guess, going to court, which is not anything that, like, this shouldn't have to be like that. It should just be a recognition of what the problem is and good leadership at the top to help resolve those problems for the benefit of all Atlantans.
To follow up on one of the questions that came in online, do you believe that leadership at the top, are they, is this a matter of them not wanting to answer to anyone? Or is there really something that they are trying to hide? What is the question that came in online?
I'm going to pass on that. You know, the very nature of who we are and what our work is, we don't speculate, right? Like, so I'm not gonna to do that. I would just say, you know, to hark back to what I already said about the non-engagement with this thing that we're accurately characterizing as an emergency for our office. And, you know, everyone, we want to be able to do our jobs. If we can't do our jobs, we won't be able to show the public that there is some if corruption is afoot, we're not going to be able to find it. And everyone should have an interest in making sure we have the tools so that we can find it.
We'll get two more here and then more here.
We keep talking about leadership at the top, but what it sounds like we're talking about is a culture that's more of a pool that everyone is swimming in. And the larger implications of that seem to be, well, actually, let me ask one. You talk about the particular vulnerabilities that the city has. And as just a citizen, because I'm not involved in government, other than I vote, I try to stay reasonably informed. And I think I'm more reasonably informed than the average citizen, just by virtue of being downtown. How would the average citizen be able to be more engaged or to bring more engagement to them in sense of what are the limits what are the limitations on how the media is used to actually reach people from your office? And then how do you tie that to very specific instances, like a few years ago, Department of Watershed had a bunch of people who were selling off all the stuff in Department of Watershed, and then here we are crippled downtown by an entire infrastructure that fails and doesn't allow us to operate either as residents or as community members and business owners. And then how do you also tie this type of corruption and this type of things that you're unfolding to the fact that the government at the state level is actually trying to find reasons to take the airport away from the city of Atlanta, and why it's important for our elected officials to actually play nice and water, so the city of Atlanta still maintains some type of authority. They've lost all war authority, but can they maintain the power authority that allows us to actually create a political environment that allows the type of activity here that is so different from the rest of the state to continue in a different way?
Yeah.
To continue to grow us power.
So the tie to the airport, I mean, this all happened before I got here, but it's not a secret that that was part of the rah, yes, we're gonna get an Office of Inspector General to keep those efforts at bay, right? The look, we can kind of investigate ourselves and police ourselves and make sure that there's integrity in operations. That was part of the discussion, as I understand it, right? I wasn't here, but from what I've read, that mattered, right? That having this office that has jurisdiction, including the airport, existing is that was supposed to help. Look, we can conduct ourselves with integrity and have this office to act as a check. I think that's not lost, right? That should be part of the discussion. How the public stays informed, goodness, right? I mean, someone encountered me and said, I recognize you from somewhere. Where do I recognize you? And I was like, I don't, this worked out great. I said, no. And then she said, oh, public comment. I was like, oh my gosh, like, is that the thing? Oh no.
Welcome to Atlanta. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But there's something to that in the, I don't know if this person had watched live or watched the media coverage of it. I think that in terms of public engagement, I mean, we do it in our office because it so matters to the work that we do. But I think is just, Jane taxpayer, I think paying attention to council meetings where, because the way that this city government is structured, where it's not this way in a lot of other cities where there's a kind of stronger mayor, but and that's not individual, it's not personal, it's a strong mayor system, right?
Yep.
Where here, for every contract that's of a certain value, every transaction, that's coming before city council. That doesn't happen in all places where there's that level of transparency about so many of city operations. And so I think if someone's really looking to be engaged, I think, start paying attention to some of these council meetings, because you'll get a glimpse of a lot that's happening in the city, both the kind of the laws that are being passed, but those laws that are being passed are about city operations. And that can be a big time commitment, but you turn it on, keep it in the back, right? It's everything streamed live. There's a lot of great transparency around the city's meetings. And so I think that's a thing, besides paying attention to the media. And just a little to that media point, one of the things that's been kicked around for the sake of oversight and increase for the office is if you have to have certain checks before this office can issue a press release or this office can appear certain places. And that's the kind of thing that I'm ready to, flag on the play, right? It's like, no, that's not helping the city of Atlanta to stifle this office's engagement with the public, to stifle this office's engagement with the media. How's the public served by that? Answer, it's not. It just isn't.
Last question. Go ahead.
Hi, Shannon, thank you to CCI for having you, thank you to you and your team for what you're doing. It's not a given that this would have happened. And then I'm certain that that creates for you all. I don't know the rest of us can appreciate, so thank you for what you're doing. The question real quick is, how did you get hired? I'm just, if this is the culture and the milieu that this is you're dealing with. The forces that are acting against you now, I'm just curious, is the process of hiring the city valid and good? Because somehow someone looked at your resume and hired you at the city. So was it a surprise to them that someone who came from New York, with your record, with credentials, with your competency, got hired and you're trying to do your job? So is the hiring process of HR good at the city? How do we get blessed to pay you? Because something works. Because it's not trying to fix the problem. You're the problem. So they're trying to fix it. So did it work? Is something good there?
You're very So one of the best things that Atlanta did when creating the office was to have the board, right? So governing board. So how I was describing in New York for the Department of Investigation, that is the dual reporting that acts as checks and balances. Here in Atlanta, the governing board is supposed to do that, right? That the section of the charter that introduces the governing board begins with the sentence, to ensure the independence of the Office of the Inspector General, there shall be governing board, right? So the board is there to ensure the independence of the office. That is the point. The governing board was responsible for hiring me, right? So the governing board for the Office of the Inspector General, she said this earlier, it is unlike other BACEs, right? That it's not mayoral appointees, it's not city council appointees, it's no political appointees, it's 9 institutions with stake in the success of the city of Atlanta who appoint the nominees to the board. So we have APAB has a representative, the 7 universities have a representative, the Atlanta Bar Association, Gate City Bar, Business League, Legal Women Voters, I'm leaving some out, but 9 institutions that appoint these individuals. So it's that allows us to be able to act the way we do and move the way we do, because it's not these political people who have appointed these people who could then kind of get inroads. And so that board then does the hiring. And then it's also that board, you know, any idea, it's like, you know, the rogue term's been used, I'd used in our last board meeting, off the rails, right? That I can only be removed for cause. And it's from that board determining that, not somebody in leadership who's irritated because we had a report that found misconduct. Yeah. So as a systemic matter, that's what's there that helped both kind of have me in the position and have whoever else will come after me in the position, assuming the office survives, because I don't make that assumption, because whether it's taken away altogether, which I don't think that no one's going to do that. It looks too bad. It looks too craven, right? Too craven to do away with it altogether, you know, too bad if you try to defund, right? It just looks too obvious of what you're doing. But all of these potential legislative moves that for the sake of checks and balances and oversight increases, that is trying to take the knees out from the office. And no professional in this space would stand at the head, no credible professional in this space would stand at the head of some office that is a hollow shell. So it is having those board members act as that kind of barrier. They don't need to do anything else other than exist for the same thing that you talked about, the appointing, the removal, only if there's something egregious, right? That as a structural matter, Atlanta really got right.
So before this becomes a leadership lunch, I want to,
Right.
and honestly, part of this is there's just so much information that this was a panel and a leadership discussion all at once. Like there's just so much that I wanted to make sure we were able to capture. You know, in closing, just two last things here. On behalf of 116,000 hypothetical people who, you know, may have decided that they wanted their government to go in a different direction on a very specific piece of legislation, if a group of people or individuals feel that their local government has not acted in their best interest and in fact may have actually violated procedure and in some cases obstructed the law in silencing of them hypothetically. Is there a process in which the public can come to your office and say, hey, I believe something has happened that amounts to abuse, corruption? And if yes, what is the process and procedure? And if not, how do we potentially, where should the public go when they see abuse, fraud, and corruption in a process or a procedure?
Yeah, no, definitely our office. Definitely our office, because the hypothetical that you just outlined fits squarely within our wheelhouse, right? That this is what we do. Fraud, waste, abuse, corruption, violations of rules, policies, laws at the city level, within city government, those touching on city government. But in the world where we didn't determine it was something we would do, we take great pains to make external referrals out to those entities that we think could cover things, right? We get a lot of things through the various mechanisms, atloig.org website, Inspector General at atlantagA.gov, email address, call us.
Can we Twitter at you?
Very clearly, don't Twitter at me.
Yeah.
That's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're on social media, and definitely Felicia can fill everybody in on all the things and take a card.
But
and
is there
all
a
of that.
formal way? Like, do I need to say, hi, I am submitting, like, I mean, genuinely, is there a form?
There's a
Is there
complaint form on our website, atloig.org.
the public can fill that out.
And the people, and if you send us an email saying, hey, I think there's a problem, we will, you don't need to use any magic words. It's not, okay, this is a complaint. The law, one of the weird things about the charter and the way it was set up, and I know why now it was set up, it's like, you know, you have to cite some version of law. You don't have to do that, right? Like, you give us an issue, we can look into it, because now we then have a basis for looking into it.
Is my
even if you
complaint
didn't
subject
cite
to
law.
open records request? Like, if I submitted 116,000 of them, like, would that be subject to open records request and potential doxing? The city would never do that, but I just wanted to know.
Hypothetically, yeah, they are, though not while we have active open investigations.
Okay, so once it's
So-
closed, then
Right.
I would.
So if we open it, once it's closed, if we decide not to open it, then that would be subject to exposure, because that, you know, it's only that it's when it's open that we get to kind of keep it. But we take great pains to make sure that anything that comes to our office, if we can direct people to a resource or somewhere else, because again, we're public servants. We want to make sure that whatever people bring to us, that their concerns and issues are being addressed, if not from us, then by somebody else who can do it.
Got it. So in closing, I know you said you don't arbitrate between conflict and like come up with your opinion necessarily on conflict, but we're both clear that Kendrick Lamar won the rap battle that was of our time. But in that, the rallying cry there is not like us, right? In Atlanta, the rallying cry, if you want to shut down someone in a rap battle, is you're not from Atlanta. And I can shut you down immediately by doing that.
Yep.
And there are undertones of that that are valid. Where if you're not from Atlanta, there are things in Atlanta that you just cannot inherently understand. And there is nothing that can be done about that. You just have to accept that, and that is what it is. But it also sometimes is expanded to be used to shut down constructive and necessary conversation. We started this conversation this morning where you informed me that those conversations were even getting to the point where people were questioning your identity as a person. whether you're, not only Atlanta enough, but are you Black enough to be able to have some of the conversations that you are having, right? And this is a dangerous territory that we're in for two reasons. One, because I think it evades us being able to have complex conversations about things. But number two, it's putting an enormous pressure on one individual to try to solve this for us. I think that I'm concerned, frankly, just person to person about the toll that this is going to take, not just on you, but your staff and like what you're carrying and how you're carrying it. I'd like you to be able to, close us out on like what's preventing you from just not just like lighting a match and being like, I'm out. Like, you don't have to do that. I mean, it's not like you're unemployable, right? Like I'll check your Cash App first, but like, but you don't have to do this. You don't have to be in Atlanta. And Atlanta is going to use these tactics to be able to say, like, you're not like us. And so what's your response to that? And how are you going to be able to galvanize the general public that is going to be told that this office is actually attacking the very Atlanta way that we believe in?
Ugh. Okay, all right, that's a lot. So, all right. So for everyone in the room, what Rohit was referring to was we were on the not so subtle side accused of racism, right? Which is part of the Quell OIG playbook from across the country, right? It's happened in other cities and unfortunately, those Black-run cities, because that's the easy thing. If you're going after anyone who's Black, which if the government is majority run Black, then you're just going after corruption in the government, right? But that's been a thing that's happened in other cities. It's typical. And during our first meeting, I said that to Rohit. I was like, well, they clearly can't do that here, right? Like, that's not going to be the thing that's deployed here. Until then, last city council meeting, it was. It's like, and we just laughed in the office. We're like, word? That's what's happening? So the Office of the Inspector General, run by this gal, right? Again, I told you how I grew up, right? So I was like, no, I just laughed. Like, okay, how terribly desperate, how obviously, cloyingly desperate. Because before it had just been outsider, right? That you're not from here in barely covert ways, right? Yeah. Oh, where you went to school? Oh, trying to make a name for yourself. It's like, no, that's not what this is about. I believe in this work. I came here because what a wonderful opportunity to do this work in a place that clearly needed it. Now, like I said, these are issues that are universal. I believe every city should have it. It's striking how few cities actually have them. And they wait till there's some scandal, right? Since this office was formed, an office was formed in Dallas, same situation. Scandal with a high-ranking legislator there, right? And so, that's Office of Inspector General. And so I'm in close contact with them, right? So there was a need here and it was acute. And I was so glad to be able to do this work for the benefit of this new city. No, this is not my city. I lived for years in New York and Brooklyn. Like I said, I'm a Jersey girl. Atlanta is entirely new to me, but the work that I do is for the benefit of the entire city of Atlanta. And you were talking about the toll on me, because it's me, it's not me. There's a whole office. We are all committed to this work. When I say Felicia, no, not the stuff about my background, it's because it's not about me. It's about the Office of the Inspector General being able to serve Atlanta. And you want to call me an outsider? Okay. But I think a lot of the Atlanta insiders, people who are born and raised in Atlanta, are offended by some of the corrupt practices that have happened here. As you said, it was the headlines for quite a while. The public doesn't want that to happen. And that, no, I don't have, all of the Atlanta cred behind me And that's okay, because it's not personal. There's a lot of stuff this year that's taken personal. It's not about me. It's about the work of the office. And the work of the office is about protecting taxpayers, protecting the people of Atlanta. And so, yes, this outsider is trying to help everyday Atlanta citizens, not just those with connections to people in power, but every citizen. Office of the Inspector General is here for every citizen. And as long as we are allowed to do this work, we're going to continue to do the work.
We appreciate it, yeah. Can y'all join me in giving Shannon a big round of applause? Thank you, thank you. We're really grateful for you spending so much time with us today. Thank you to all of you who were here. Our next conversation is around the referendum and direct democracy. And so we will be having an incredible panel of people from lawyers to grassroots organizers to even a council member who's going to be joining us for an open, honest, and a council member who voted for the training facility about what the implications are today around a referendum. We're also working on a leadership breakfast with the next superintendent. The Atlanta Public School System has a new superintendent, and there's a post-3 at-large election that is happening this year. So I know everyone wants to talk about what's happening nationally, but locally we do have a race that is happening. That there are 5 candidates that are involved in that. We're going to be doing one-on-one sit downs with those who accept that invitation, and then a forum as well for them to be a part of it. But Shannon, just thank you. Like the candor and the amount of time that you've given us is so appreciated. Sound the alarm on this. This is important. It doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree with the Office of the Inspector General, but we have to agree that we need this. Like, this is important. This office cannot become a shell. It is something that is important for political accountability, but also for the public to be able to feel like we can trust our government again. That's a part of that process. So thank you for your leadership. We appreciate
Thank
you.
you for having me.
Great. Awesome.
you.
Thanks. Cool. Thanks. Appreciate it too.
Thank you.
Yeah.